My journey has been the complete opposite of that. It has been long hours, it has been a lot of graft, it has been saying yes to often opportunities that aren't that sexy. I've worked in the media industry for about 10 years. I've been in this industry for years and I'm still taking unpaid gigs.
Do you think we're past the point of no return?
Hello, I actually care and I really want to do my bit, but I also sort of want to fly to Ibiza every now and again.
I, as an adult, wouldn't know how to manage that.
Well, enter Abbie.
Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got Abbie with us. Abbie, do you just quickly want to introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself?
Yeah, although I never really know what to say when I have to introduce myself or write a bio or something. So here's another attempt at it. My name is Abbie. I am a broadcaster and a content creator. I've worked in the media industry for about 10 years. And my specialism or niche, if you like, is I've been a weather presenter for the majority of that time. And through weather and through educating other people about the weather, have kind of moved into talking more about climate and climate change because of how much that's part of our conversation at the moment. So my sort of specialism is sustainable storytelling. I like to, try and make this whole natural disaster a little bit more positive sometimes. And I do that on TV, on radio, largely on the BBC, and through social media as well, through TikTok, through Instagram. I'm married. I have a rescue French bulldog who is 12 going on.
Wow.
Terrible too. She's like a little teenager. I don't know what's wrong with her. But that's a little bit about me. I live in Yorkshire. I'm born and bred sort of northerner. And I just love everything to do with broadcasting and behind the scenes. And if you follow me on social media, you'll know that because I've been sharing the secrets of the infamous weather presenter green screen for a long time.
I'm actually really looking forward to this conversation because there's so much to cover, but I do feel your pain whenever someone asks you, what do you do for a living? And you're like, this could be a very long conversation. I'm going to try and keep it very short and sweet.
I know. And I feel like also, sometimes I think, it would be easier if I was just an accountant because then, that's kind of the end of the conversation then. Whereas it changes every day. It depends who I'm talking to as to what I introduce myself as. I think when I say presenter, it can sometimes sound a little bit strange, and then you can open up a can of worms, can't you?
100%. I mean, every time I go in, like you say, every time I go in, I'm like, it's a different introduction every time. You sit there and go, what do I do? I think when you do lots of different things, it's like, as you say, it's kind of like what's most relevant to the person you're speaking to kind of gauge that. But yeah, it's a very difficult thing when you're a bit of a jack of all trades.
I know, in an industry that is totally bonkers, and I think an industry that most people find very interesting, which is great because then inevitably you open up the can of worms and everybody has loads of questions. But some days you're like, I can't really be bothered to get into it.
No, I feel that, especially like obviously being a disabled content creator as well. The days, like sometimes I love the ridiculous questions. Other days I'm like, Dave, I really can't be bothered. I'm just trying to drink my beer in peace. Leave it alone.
I need to be able to toggle off all social media deactivated for the day.
Yes, 100%. Just as we dive in, tell us a bit of how you ended up in weather. Like, how did that happen?
So that was kind of a happy accident. I'm not a meteorologist by trade. I'm not in anything really. I didn't go to university or study anything. I always wanted to work in media, in telly, in radio. I feel like when I was kind of 11 or 12 watching, Big Brother and these amazing programs like Saturday Morning Telly with Cat Deeley and people, that was the industry that I fell in love with. And it's not really like that nowadays. The TV landscape is so different. People consume their media in such a different way. So I'm kind of dealing with a very different industry to the one that I dreamt of working in, if you like. But when I was first starting out, it was just about to go through this huge change. So it was, there were kind of entry level opportunities, although very few and far between. But there was lots of opportunities in local radio and community radio and things. And thankfully, at the time, this was, oh my goodness, like maybe 10, 11, 12 years ago now, which is mad because I still feel 12 years old. But so I started kind of volunteering at like a community radio station, Siren FM, which was at my local university, even though I didn't go to university. So I got lots of experience just free, really interested in working and finding out the inner workings of stuff. And through that, then managed to get into the BBC, just literally making cups of tea for people at BBC Radio Lincolnshire. Managed to, somebody phoned in sick one day. I knew how to push a few buttons. So then I got a shift at the BBC. And that's literally like how my kind of foot got in the door in the media industry, and I would just apply for lots of jobs because I was very interested in lots of things. I've always been very much into sport, so I did a stint working at BBC Sport for a while. My first actual on-air job was working for Motors TV, which is a channel on Sky that no longer exists, and I was covering British rallying, so motorsport. So again, like totally different, but I was just absolutely fascinated, more so in being the kind of communicator and the storyteller and finding out loads of things about stuff that I didn't really know about. But I guess through my love of sport, my love for the outdoors, they're kind of synonymous. You know, if you like any form of sport, the chances are you do spend quite a lot of time on a rainy court on a Tuesday night or whatever, obsessing over the weather forecast. So this job came up in weather, and I thought, well, it would be a dream. You know, it's TV, it's radio, it's, again, talking about weather and climate, things that I've always been sort of interested in, but just never really had a specialism in. So I thought, well, I've nothing to lose by applying. And I actually didn't get the first weather job that I applied for, but got the experience and, you know, had to go with the green screen and did a screen test for the first time and stuff. And then another one came up very shortly after. And that's the one that I got. And then I got all of my training with the Met Office on the job. The BBC used to do their weather in association with the Met Office. So that was about 9 or 10 years ago now. And I have just been this sponge absorbing all this, you know, information. And I still have barely even scratched the surface. I'm learning every single day. But I think the fact that I have been going on this journey of learning about the weather and the climate almost with the viewer and with the audience has meant that actually, you know, a lot of the content that I've made has been, I guess, appreciated and enjoyed by people, because there perhaps might have been an assumption, if I were a meteorologist and have studied the weather for 4 years, there's that assumed knowledge sometimes, I think, when you are the expert, you know, and actually you've got to remember that a lot of the audience aren't. A lot of the audience were people like me who didn't know anything. So that's an incredibly long answer of how I got into it.
I mean, it makes sense. And it's really interesting as well, because I think working in weather, it's one of those things that, as you said, it's quite niche. So it's not something that oftentimes you go, oh, I want to do that. Like, plenty of people have sort of said it, but then there's the inner working, it's like of how the job actually works, what you need to understand, what you need to convey to the audience. Because like you said, the main reason I think people resonate with you is because I think there's a fine line of, there's that saying that if you're an expert in something, you're able to explain it in layman's terms. But then there's also an element of, if you learn it through sort of osmosis rather than actively searching for that information, you were able to articulate it in a simpler or a more like digestible way. So I think that's what's really interesting from your story. But then it's also the fact, whenever I interview someone from like broadcasting, so much of it is always like one random opportunity of like wedging your foot in a door will mean that you end up in the most random scenarios. I mean, I've had what's his name? His name's just got out of my head. Oh my God, live on the recording.
Charlie from the future here. If anyone was wondering, it was Chris Sawyer.
Interesting. Whenever I talk to people in the industry, it's just the most random opportunities that will come up, and you sit there thinking, how do you, like, I often ask, like, what advice would you give young people trying to get in broadcasting? Because I think a lot of the time as well, we're in a world now where everyone wants something yesterday. So to kind of have that feeling of like, just try something, someone will give you an opportunity, can sometimes feel like a bit of a bitter pill to swallow.
100%. And like, I am very impatient. As part of the reason I didn't go to university, the thought of having to wait 3 or 4 years before I could actually kind of grasp getting into an industry, I couldn't bear the thought of it. And so in my early days, when I was asking people for advice and they were saying, oh, you know, do unpaid work experience and try this and try and email these people and talk to these people, the response always felt, I was thrilled to get a response, because nine times out of 10 you don't get a response. But when you did, and it was quite disheartening, because you just, like you say, you just want somebody to say, here's an opportunity, this is your big break. And it's just, you know, like you see in the movies, a lot of the time it isn't like that. Yes, you do get the rare occasion where somebody wins, I don't know, some sort of competition, or they're spotted on the street, or whatever happens, and they're just propelled to stardom. But my journey has been the complete opposite of that. It has been long hours, it has been a lot of graft, it has been saying yes to often opportunities that aren't that sexy and that, you know, you don't want to do. And there was years of me pining and yearning to be a presenter when I was the person that was lifting up the cables for the presenter to make sure that they didn't trip over. Like, I put in the groundwork and the legwork. And actually, I think that has made me a better presenter to work with, hopefully, because I've been in those people's shoes. I know what that job entails. I know how hard that is. And I also, can have a bit of an appreciation for if my mic is in the wrong place because I've been the person that has had to deal with the sound, or if I stumble and then have to pick something up, trying to do it in a crisp way so that the person doing it, the edit, has an easier job doing it. Like, I hope it's made me a more well-rounded A, person, but B, presenter. And so in terms of advice, this is what I got told, in my early days. And it was just to say yes to everything. You never know where an opportunity is going to lead you. And, like I say, it might not seem like something that you actually want to do, but you don't know who you're going to meet. You don't know where that opportunity will lead. You also don't know what it might light some sort of fire in you. And you might be like, oh, I actually really enjoyed that. And there have been times in my career where I've thought, I don't know if I've got the energy to keep going and be like the presenter because it feels too competitive. But actually, I love this industry so much that I would actually still quite enjoy being a producer or being, somebody that works behind the scenes, and I've done those jobs, so I actually know what they entail. So I think a combination of say yes to everything and also utilise what we have at our fingertips, which is essentially my dog, but also, a phone with a camera, with a mic, and editing software that's free, and things that I just feel like even 10 years ago were so much harder to come by. We've got our own broadcast channels through social media now. So
interestingly, someone I interviewed before said the same thing of basically use what's at your disposal, start a digital podcast, start doing that. And I think, it is just a case of just try, like you say, it's that whole thing of just try different things and see what works. I think it is just that daunting element, particularly whenever I interview someone from broadcasting, of that whole thing of you just got to hope that someone gives you a chance at the end of the day. And as I said, that I know myself as someone that wants everything yesterday, that's a very tricky thing to balance. And as well as that, I would caveat that as well of I understand where it comes from, particularly in a professional instance of, unfortunately, I'm one of those people that believes that money doesn't make the world go round, but on some scales it does. And then that's a catch-22 of gaining free experience is invaluable at times, but then balancing that in your here and now can be really tricky.
So tricky. And also, I've been in this industry for years and I'm still taking unpaid gigs. I'm like, my 26 to 30 rail card, or whatever my rail card is about to expire because I'm 31 now, and I'm still paying to get the train to work for free. And I'm like, damn, I thought I would be at the point in my life now where I'm earning really good money. And obviously some gigs are really well paid, but it is just the nature of this job. I even listened to a podcast recently with Davina McCall, and she said that she's still pitching ideas to producers or to commissioners, and they're like not interested. And I think, well, bloody hell, if they're still doing that, then there's no hope for me.
Right. That's crazy when you think about that. Like, you would have thought someone of Davina McCall's stature would just wander into a room and they go, yeah, we'll do it.
I know, but I think that is a product of where we're at in this industry now. It's becoming so much more competitive. There are so many more there's so much more kind of competition, I think, for people's attention, because we've got smartphones, we've got social media, we've got podcasts, we've got so many different platforms, and we're almost overwhelmed with content that commissioners have to be really specific about what they are commissioning now, because everybody's making their own stuff, which is great because it gives people the platform, but it does change mainstream media hugely. And I kind of think nobody really knows what they're doing. Everybody's just sort of faking it. But yeah, it's one of those things. I do genuinely believe, though, and I've seen this firsthand, that if you want it enough and you are willing to put the work in some way, shape or form, it will work out for you. Like I meet people all the time, I certainly did when I was full time at the BBC, and they'd be doing work experience, and I would be able to tell within half an hour of chatting to them if they were going to go on and be successful or if they weren't. And I could have literally said it to them. I tell them all the same piece of advice, and I think to myself, you're going to 100% make it, or I don't know if you are. And then in 2 or 3 years, that 100% people will reach back out or will cross paths in some way, and they'll be doing some amazing job somewhere. And I'm like, I called it, because I genuinely think that work ethic and that, absolute commitment to this industry, which is ultimately what it needs, is enough to get you there. You've just got to stick at it.
It's that power of invisible PR, isn't it? It's that whole thing of you never know what's going to come back to you
Never.
and at what point. Honestly, it's like I was playing devil's advocate there. It's a really fine line to try and navigate, because I can understand the other side of it as well, particularly for young people. I say young people, I'm only 25. That makes me sound well old.
You're young.
26. I even have to correct myself. How bad's that? Yeah, it's difficult for young people, because I think, as we say about social media as well, there's that element of everyone's seen to be really successful, but as we all say, it's the highlight reel. Not everyone's doing that 100% of the time.
No way. And even Davina McCall, I'm sure, she's only putting out her best bits because it's sort of what we're programmed to do. And I'm like quite a closed book emotionally, even to my husband. He always calls me the ice queen because I'm not very good at talking about my emotions and my feelings. So I'm really not good at showing anything other than what I'm kind of professionally doing. And I think that the longer I'm in the industry, the more I'm closing off my personal life just to protect myself and my little bubble. So they're like, even more so when I'm having a bad day, the last thing I'm going to do, I think, is go online. I'm trying to get better at it because it makes a difference for me. If I see somebody that I really admire and look up to, be honest and come on there and, say it how it is. So I'm trying to practice what I preach there and get better at it. But it's the last thing you feel like doing when you're having a bad day, isn't it? Go online and tell some strangers about it.
Most of the time, you just want to hide. It's a really tricky thing. I want to pull on a thread that you mentioned earlier. As a fellow podcaster, we're talking about obviously broadcasting and a lot of people wanting to get into that because they've started a podcast and everything else. I'd be intrigued to get your point of view on the idea that podcasting is very saturated, because I'm very conflicted of, I think there are the huge boom of people starting podcasts. I was part of, I think it has had an impact, but then I don't want to say to someone, don't follow that path, because it's also opened so many doors to me. As a fellow podcaster, what's your view on it in terms of the idea that what I've said before and friends have said to me, everyone and their nan's got a podcast now.
Yeah. That's how it feels. I launched one earlier in the year. I mean, literally join the club. Like, I think my view on that is a bit like social media, really. There's space for everyone. The world is big enough. We've got enough ears and enough eyes and enough hours in the day, and everybody's got something different that they would like to listen to. So there's absolutely, I think, nothing stopping you from launching something. If you think it is going to be of interest and you think it's slightly different, what is a bit of a shame and is a bit frustrating is when a really big name, be it somebody that's been on reality TV or, somebody that perhaps is on the radio or on telly or something, launches something just for the sake of them being a big name. But in saying that, I fall foul of liking a comedian or something and listening to a podcast that I don't really have an interest in the subject matter. I listen to Josh Widdicombe and Rob Beckett's Parenting Hell podcast. I don't have kids, but I enjoy them. So I've kind of just contradicted myself there. But, there is space for everyone. And that is the beauty, I think, of podcasting. Yeah. Particularly when you look at I don't know much about it, but I was chatting to somebody the other day who's worked in the American podcast market. And he said it's like, obviously America's much, much bigger than the UK. So I guess there is more room, but he said it's on another scale. And the UK is like, if anything, really lagging behind. And the UK is only just going to continue to grow. So I'm kind of here for it. It feels as though I've been part of TV and radio as it's been slowly declining, which has been a really sad thing to see. So if I can be a part of another part of the media industry that is kind of booming and growing, I'm all for that. I'm very excited by that.
I think it's really interesting because, as I say, you kind of brought us to the fact that the way we consume media is completely different now. I don't think I can't remember the last time I watched a traditional TV program, apart from maybe like live events. So like if I'm watching the football or the horse racing or wherever it might be, I can't remember the last time I sat down and just watched TV.
No, everybody's watching it on demand.
Yeah.
And it's the same, with audio now. I would drive to school every single day with my mum and we would listen to the radio.
Yeah, me too.
And I work in that industry. Maybe that's why I don't now, but more often than not, I will have a podcast or Spotify music or something on streaming that I'm streaming on a car journey now, as opposed to the radio. So, who am I to say? Even I work in the industry and I've been really sad to see it kind of suffer a little bit. but I'm kind of part of the problem, but it's just what we're interested in.
Is it suffering or is it changing? Because I would view it as like, it's just the way the media industry works has changed. It's just moving away from what we see as traditional media and moving to a new form of media, being social media, podcast, on-demand music, on-demand TV. It's kind of just changing. But then I do wonder as well, as we said earlier, is that then feeding the feeling of I want everything yesterday? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think with social media and with the internet, it is allowing people to become like overnight sensations. If you go, there was I can't remember what she was kind of known for. There was a TikToker that used to make these videos. I mean, it hasn't everybody, but she just used to make Tube Girl. She was known for dancing on the tube. That was it. And then, within a matter of weeks of her videos going viral, she was like walking the catwalk at Paris Fashion Week or something like that. We've seen Lissy McIntosh, who's a Formula One content creator who now is in the paddock. She's fully employed by Formula One. She's, a presenter at the face of, she's just won a Forbes 30 Under 30 award. And I have seen that happen with my very eyes. And yet, I'm kind of the old school, clawing away, still knocking at the door, sending emails. Hello, remember me? And I have benefited in some way from the rise of social media, don't get me wrong. But I think when you're like watching these people become overnight sensations and successes, and it feels like it's happening all the time, there must be that element of why isn't this happening to me? Yeah. When I'm putting, particularly if you are somebody that is making content and some of the stuff is going quite well, but those sorts of things are still so rare. Those sorts of, shooting to stardom situations, yes, they're happening. And yes, social media is aiding that. But it is still, I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't advise anybody to bank on something like that happening.
It's also how sustainable it is. Like, you see so many random people go viral. They do really well for like a week. And because they're not used to that level of stardom. I'm saying all this, I'm definitely not a star. Don't have any idea how I'd react to it. I could be exactly the same. But I think it's that whole thing of, unless you've sat down and gone, if this happens, I'm going to do this. Your brain's just going to go, what is going on?
Totally. And then, you're essentially living in this unrealistic state of euphoria because opportunities that are flying your way that are beyond your wildest dreams, but that's not how the rest of your life is going to pan out. And so if that's happened to you, particularly if that's happened to you when you're really young, for example, you're almost going to be constantly trying to chase that level of euphoria again, which is, it's hard enough when you've sort of gradually got there and then you've had the odd peak, which I feel like I have. But I have done it in a way in which, I have paved out a career that is sustainable, quite literally in sustainability. But it is, I have fingers in so many pies. I have things to fall back on. I have so much experience and knowledge that has been something that I've got over a decade in the industry. So if the odd thing goes viral and the odd opportunity comes out of it, it's great. Don't get me wrong, who knows where it might take me. But, worst case scenario, like you say, within 12 months or 12 years or whatever, when the next viral sensation comes around and you're sort of left in the dust, it's very important to try and have that foundation, isn't it? Which I don't think many people will have.
No, particularly I'm just making myself sound old again, but particularly when you see so many young kids doing well on social media and you're like, whoa, okay, how are you managing that? Because I, as an adult, wouldn't know how to manage that, let alone at their age.
I mean, we're not built as humans, we're cave people. We've evolved from a cave. We're only really meant to have to deal with our tiny village and what they think and what they think about us. And here we are now, however many centuries on, dealing with the whole world sometimes and what their view is of us. And we are just not programmed as humans to deal with that level of criticism. It doesn't matter how thick your skin is. Some days you have a fine day and you think, oh, sod off. And the next day you can have a complete mental breakdown over it. Yeah. So again, that is something that I think age and experience will gradually teach you. But that is the scary thing about social media, is that it can happen to you whatever age and whatever your experience. And we are just not built or programmed in a way in which we are okay to deal with that level of scrutiny.
100%. And coming on from that, I wanted to go back to your podcast and where the inspiration for that came from. And tell us a bit about the journey there and the stresses and the pressures of that.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, so Green Queens is the podcast that myself and my co-presenter Imogen Bogle, a fellow sustainability and tech presenter, actually, she sort of specialises in green tech, that we launched earlier in the year. We launched it on February the 14th on Valentine's Day, and it was our kind of love letter to planet Earth. We are really good mates. We're both presenters. We've both, again, sort of had a decade's worth of experience in the broadcast industry. Hers, funnily enough, mainly online. She's worked for a YouTube channel called The Fully Charged Show, which has got like millions of subscribers. And her background is she's actually an automotive engineer, Oxford educated, fiercely intelligent.
I remember watching the episode. Yeah, I remember it.
Yeah, she's a queen. But she's also just hilarious, and we just have a lot of fun. And we kind of found ourselves getting together and like putting the world to rights and talking about, two women working in actually quite a male-dominated industry a lot of the time when it comes to talking about cars in particular and when it comes to talking about technology. So there was kind of a lot of chit-chat that we'd have about that, but we would also just tell each other random facts about, we'd meet somebody, through our job and who's doing something amazing to save our planet in some small way, whether it be from teddy bears to beer in the way that they're doing it. And we were fascinated by these stories and hearing what each other had to say and the sorts of people we were meeting out and about. And then we were like, there's got to be other people that will be interested in this. The fact that we're making this content anyway, and this is our life, there's got to be another platform that we can give these people and that we can shine a spotlight on them in. We sort of started talking about a podcast, honestly, a couple of years ago, but I think we both assumed that, as we said earlier, that the market was already saturated, that there was already stuff like it. So we just like gradually started sending people each other links to stuff. Oh, have you heard this on BBC Radio 4? Oh, this sort of nugget was done here. Oh, there's this sciencey podcast. But it was exactly that. It was all very information heavy. It was very sciencey, or it was very preachy and quite judgmental. There wasn't anything that felt like entry level, green, conscious, sustainability. It all felt a bit judgy and therefore a bit, panic, I'm just going to bury my head in the sand. And that's coming from somebody that I pride myself as that I think I do live a very kind of conscious life, but I'm still not perfect. So I think that's the key messaging that we were really trying to put out, because we didn't feel like there was a safe space for people to say, hello, I actually care and I really want to do my bit, but I also sort of want to fly to Ibiza every now and again. So, that is the community, if you like, that we want to build and that we want to reach. And through putting out our first series, we've found that there are other people that feel the same. And that's, I think every single guest we speak to at the end, they sort of go, oh, that was such a nice chat. And that's, what a wonderful platform to be able to give people that space, but also to give it in a way that doesn't feel like we're holding them to account. We're just asking them questions, and everything sort of has this green thread running through it. But I mean, we go off on a tangent every now and again. So it's been wonderful. And it's very much at the moment just a passion project. We went down this rabbit hole talking to sponsors last year, and it just ended up getting a bit messy and a bit cloudy. And we thought, let's just do it for ourselves, because this is the thing. Like, I've worked for the BBC for a long time. Everything is quite heavily produced, and you have a lot of other opinions on what you're making for good reason. It's public, it's licensed fee funded. Everything, all the money has to be spent in a really good way. And same with Imogen, she's worked for a YouTube channel that has been running in a way in which it sort of heavily relies on ads and advertisements. And obviously when you're dealing with advertiser money, you can't be completely impartial on things. So we both wanted just a space that was quite safe and like we could have a bit of fun with creatively. And therefore we've ended up doing a lot of the legwork. And you will know, Charlie, from having a podcast, that legwork is leggy.
Yeah, it's leggy, it's long, it's hard, but as I say, I wouldn't change it for the world. And I think what's really nice about your podcast is, as you say, it's that kind of perfect balance between informative, but also doesn't feel really in your face. And it's really intriguing that, like, I can see a lot of similarities between what you guys are trying to achieve in the sustainability space and then me in the disability space. It's kind of, it's really weird because, like you say, it's almost like in both spaces, it's like people are being held to account all the time. They can't make mistakes. They can't get it wrong. And also it's that whole thing I always come back to, like, people are human. You got to allow them to make mistakes. Yes, we all use the wrong terminology. Yes, we might not do the best thing for the planet on a couple of occasions, but it's kind of that same, I suppose, same as the gym mentality of, it doesn't matter as long as you can do it consistently, you'll see improvement on it. And it's mad that we're still in that space. But then I say that, and I've often wondered from the sustainability side of things, I remember I asked this on another podcast, is, do you think we're past the point of no return? Because I think that's some of what people's reluctance to buy into some of the sustainability pledges and improving things. It's almost like, well, we're fucked at this point, so we might as well carry on.
Which is bad to me, because can you imagine if your house was on fire and, like, even if it was 95% burnt, you would still be getting the hose on it and doing everything that you could to try and put the fire out, wouldn't you? You wouldn't be like, oh, well, it's a goner, see you later, may as well just get on with life. Like, you would do everything in your power, because there's that chance and that hope. And that's just as humans how we're programmed. Like, what if we put the fire out and then actually most of the stuff is saved? Like, that is literally the point that we're at now. We're at we're pretty close, but what if we can pull it back? And we have some of the most incredible scientists and professionals looking into this sort of stuff and telling us, yes, this thing is on fire, but we have the hoses, we have the manpower, we have everything that might just pip it to its post. And yet there is still reluctance there from people. I think part of the reluctance comes from fear, a place of fear and a place of complication. And I think that's where we, as the Green Queens podcast, and just Imogen and I individually, are both really trying to make it accessible and to open up the conversation and to put it into plain English, because you can't sort of protect and you don't know what you don't understand. So it's like, you know, Imogen and I are at the point where we're getting the complicated information. It's our job now as the communicators to put it into plain English and to be like, guys, this is the issue. This is what's going on here. This is the terminology that's being used and thrown around at government level or whatever. Like, this is what it actually means. And this is what you can actually do about it. And so that's why I'm so keen to keep, as I always say, like, my whole ethos is just to try and weave it into the everyday conversation. Doesn't matter if I went to an event with my best friend who works in a totally different industry to me earlier today and met her boss, and he was asking me what I did. And again, like, the first thing I do is try and just switch on the climate change conversation. He was like, oh, I never really thought I'd be chatting about climate change today. And I was like, well, enter Abbie. So, you know, I'm just trying to plant the seed. We haven't gone too far, but we are not a million miles away from too far. And if, you know, we have children, or we're thinking about having children, or we have nieces, or we have any young people in our family, it really is our duty and our job as citizens of this earth that have perhaps played a little part in maybe, you know, not adding great things to it, to try and reverse that.
I'm going to ask you a point blank question. You don't have to know the answer. If you don't worry.
Okay, go.
Is there a guesstimation of how, if we continue the way we are, how long we've got left?
Well, the difficulty is, you know, we've been throwing around figures around 2025, 2030, 2035, and I don't think anybody knows with any great certainty, but I would say we've probably got like a 20 to 25 year window.
Right, okay.
To make some serious changes.
Okay. Because the other thing I was gonna say is a lot of the problem, I think, from my side of things is also how sustainability can be like weaved seamlessly into people's lives. So to give you a real example, in my world, one of the big pushes from the disability community is, right, so you're telling us all to get electric cars, yet none of us can use any of the charging points because we can't physically get to them. How do we move that forward? And obviously a lot of the community are really pushing for it, and Motability are pushing as well. But I think it's those little things of like, people are lazy. They want easy wins. They don't want to have to think about it. They just go, okay, this is what we do now. And it comes part of natural process. And I think the other concern as well, and to be fair, this one I do believe in, is we've got to get everyone to buy into it, otherwise it doesn't work.
Absolutely. And I think, I cannot imagine the frustration. I occasionally have this thought, and this is so, naive of me. It is naive of me because I've never experienced, being in a wheelchair or having any form of disability. But I do a lot of travel, and I often have a heavy suitcase, and so I do find myself having to look for lifts and having to look for ways around the escalator and the steps and things. And it's those moments that I think, how lucky am I that I only ever have to consider this on the rare occasion that I can't be bothered to pick up my suitcase. And it blows my mind that I am able to go through my life 99.9% of the time and not even think about it. And honestly, my heart sinks when I have those thoughts. So I'm, fortunate enough to not have to think about this sort of stuff a lot, but I am very aware of it. And particularly working, I do work with an EV charging company. They're called Osprey, and they would have every single bay. I know this for a fact because I work very closely with them. If they were allowed to have every single charging bay accessible, they would do it in a heartbeat. It's often landlords and preventative measures and planning permission, all these sorts of bits of red tape that they are met with that stops them from doing it. They have put something in place now whereby every single site has to have one, if not two, at least bare minimum. And again, they're still being met with restriction from planning authorities, from landlords. Yeah. It's completely out of their control. And so this is where we need government to step in and to put rules in place. The crazy thing about, the changes that we're seeing with hopefully trying to move into a more renewable space or not burning fossil fuels and having the electrification of vehicles. The crazy thing about that happening is that it's happened backwards. The government have kind of watched it happen, and it's had private equity firms essentially fund these sorts of projects because that they know that there's consumers and that people are interested in it. But it's taken the government however many years to catch up and go, right, okay, we should probably start looking at how this sort of looks and how this sort of works now. But it's too late. We've already rolled out this huge EV charging network across the country that's a little bit mismatched. Things work very differently. None of them look the same. Like you say, the charging cables are heavy, so now we're sort of legacy going in and trying to install lighter ones. And there's all these issues that if everybody would have just sat down around a table 10, 15 years ago when the first EVs, probably longer than that, were being thought of, and got a mix of people around that table, the disabled community included in that, and actually talked about it. But it hasn't. It's kind of worked in this way where now we're sort of putting plasters on things and trying to make it work and going, oh, shit, yeah, that bit doesn't really work, does it? So it's been a frustrating process to be a part of, but I do still strongly, this is nothing to do with the EV charging companies, and I'm not paid to say that in any way. That is my honest experience. It's been such a frustrating process for them, and therefore as well for a consumer who really believes in it and really wants to champion it, but totally sees from your perspective how frustrating that would be.
It's really interesting because, as I say, it's that whole thing of, in my head, and this is that whole comment wasn't anything directed to it was just interesting to see the connection between the two. But also I find it interesting that it's so there's two systems within the disabled community. There's the medical model and social model. Medical model leans more on you are disabled by default, and that is part of you. Whereas the social model is the community is disabling, and it's the community that's stopping me doing the things I need to do.
Yeah.
So from the social model perspective, I'm like, why can't we just like you say, just make all of them? Then it's point blank. All of them are accessible. Okay, there's the argument of space, and you can't make every space a disabled bay. But if every space in general is accessible, it's
also what benefit is there ever to packing people in to the point where you can't even get out your car, disabled or not? It's impossible to get out your car a lot of the time in these places, and the charging cables are heavy, disabled or not. So you're up against it from the get-go. It is a really, really baffling situation that we found ourselves in, but it's ultimately stemmed off of greed. If a supermarket can get 100 spaces that are slightly bigger and therefore more disability friendly, and therefore 100 customers, or they can get 150 with 20 of them disabled or slightly bigger, disability friendly, and therefore sort of 200% more customers through their door, they're going to do that. And unfortunately, that's the situation that I think a lot of these charge point operators are dealing with when it comes to landlords as well. If they're offering a certain rent profile on, I don't know, 10 bays at a certain size or 8 bays that are disability, they're going to go for the one where they get more money because everybody's greedy. And it's...
this is probably more of a question for Imogen, so feel free to be like, I haven't got a clue.
Yeah. Phone a friend.
In my eyes, I'm like, wouldn't it make more sense this is going to sound really futuristic, but to have the charger on the bottom of the car and then the space is the charger. In my head, I'm like, that if that works scientifically, I had no idea if it's even possible. But I'm like, then we get rid of this whole connect the charger. It's basically wireless charging for cars.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much incredibly innovative tech. And like you say, Imogen is the right person to interview around that. But there was even a car where I think you drove into a bay, the battery was taken out and another battery was put in. That's a Chinese charging, I'm not sure on the name or I just read about it once. So there are so many people trying to come up with solutions to this sort of issue, if you like. The problem is we're so far down the line now in this model. It's a little bit like somebody saying, why don't we change the way we fuel our cars? We're too far in now. The amount of money and infrastructure change and everything that will be associated with that. But this is what I'm saying, where like there was there's very little forward thinking from government, and from policymakers who are, if only they were having these sorts of conversations. But it's difficult to know what will take off, isn't it? The amount of new tech that's come to market.
Yeah, I have a bit of controversial opinion of like, governments are bloody useless anyway. Like, they're never going to sit around a table. They can't even get around a table for bigger problems, let alone.
This is where a lot of, I think, resistance to talk about the climate or to do anything to change the climate comes from. But my view on that is, if all these people saying that they are not going to do something because the government aren't doing it, if every single person made one small change, it would be astronomically huge in terms of the impact we would see. And actually, a really big thing that you can do is vote for government, is read into policy, is petition for things. If you believe in it, you don't have to change anything about the way you live your life, because if the people that are in that are the decision makers and that are in those important seats have the right sort of views and moral compasses and beliefs anyway, then everything should be fine. But it's just getting there.
I mean, we're getting very serious now, but took us taking a step back, because I realised we didn't discover like where your love of sustainability comes from and sort of where you got introduced to it, because it's obviously a huge passion of yours. So where did it come from?
So, I mean, I don't think anybody can work in the space of weather for as long as I have done and not like connect the dots between weather and climate, and therefore our changing climate. Like, the weather and the climate are two different things. The climate is, how a country's weather or a part of the world's weather behaves over a certain period of time, whereas the weather is more the day to day. How, what is it going to be dry? Is it going to be sunny? That is weather. But through forecasting that daily stuff and looking at then stats around, even now, for example, I'm going to forecast the weather tomorrow, and I'm very aware of the fact that it has been incredibly dry, and it's, coming up to what will potentially end up being one of the driest springs the UK has ever seen. And this is what I found myself doing all the time, was saying, we've had the warmest spring day on record. We've had the wettest January day on record. We've had a month's worth of rain. Like, by the time you've said these records or these weather warnings a few times, you do start to obviously join the dots between the weather, the climate, and then also the fact that our climate is massively changing. And you just can't ignore it. You cannot ignore it. So that was very much through more understanding and through working with it every day, and also through seeing the impacts. Forecasting rain that is going to flood somebody's home is a really, really hard thing to do. And trying to get that messaging across in a way that feels kind of urgent and important, but without being too terrifying, it feels a real big responsibility. So I think also being in positions where I was seeing people be displaced due to human-induced climate change. Like now we have the ability to say certain weather events would not have been possible pre-industrial revolution. So we can say with certainty that certain weather, we never used to be able to. It used to be climate change is a thing. This may have been because of climate change, but there is no way of pinpointing one specific thing. That's not the case now. We have the technology now to say that this would not have been possible without human-induced climate change.
What is one of those examples?
One of those examples was the temperature. We saw 2022, 42.3 or something. I can't remember the exact figure, but we got above 40 degrees in Lincolnshire. Everybody in the UK suffered. So it was that temperature would not have been humanly possible to have reached in this country without human-induced climate change, without the Industrial Revolution, without that much CO2 warming our atmosphere. And how can I sit there and say that and stand in front of a red heat warning for the first time we've ever seen in this country, and then go home and drive a petrol car and, dig out some plastic straws? Like, I don't think I would challenge anybody to do my job every single day and to not care. The more education and knowledge is power, isn't it? Like the more you know, the more you feel of responsibility to pass that messaging on. And also the feelings of helplessness after a day like that, the feelings of like, God, what the hell are we doing? I remember seeing something on social media and it was like, the world is on fire and we're still buying shoes. Or maybe somebody wrote a book called that or something. And like, that stuck with me. I think about that nearly every day. And you go to central London and you just see this craziness of like people going about their day on the tube and shopping and fast fashion and more stuff. And it's, quite intense and overwhelming that there's so many people that are switched off to it. And so
I think there's an element of they're switched on to it, but it's that classic case of, I'm just going to stick my head in the sand and pretend this isn't happening because I can't deal with it. Because I think the whole thing is like, a lot of people have that image in their head of like, the world's on fire. I know obviously we can all do a lot to improve it, but it's kind of that whole, what can I do?
Yeah.
I just want to be able to live my life. And it's kind of, I suppose, depending on the way your body processes the information, it can feel very much like, this is a huge stress added onto my day-to-day stress anyway. So to sort of cope, I'm going to compartmentalize it and go, this isn't happening, and just carry on with what I'm doing.
And that's where I think it can be a really great, we've got a great opportunity now for big businesses, big events, sport, anything, big music festivals and events, for them to be the people that are calling the shots and that are making the changes so that the average Joe doesn't have to. Like, I worked at the London Marathon recently and they had a green runner start zone. And I was there at this green start, it was a bit greener. They had, they had refillable water stations instead of using plastic bottles. They had, you didn't get given a plastic bag to put your stuff in. You got the chance to drop it the day before. There was a few different initiatives that they had there. But I chatted to a lot of people at the start in the green runners and said, you're in the green runners. Was that an active choice that you made? Are you particularly sustainable? No, most people chose it because they got free tea and coffee and because there was more toilets. So they had made the green, more environmentally sound option also the easier one. And that is where we need to get to, I think. It needs to be that driving an EV, it's a no-brainer, it's cheaper, it's easier. Of course I'm going to do it. So you don't have to put dirty fuel in your car. You can leave your house most days with a full tank of petrol, if you like, full charge. Like, that's the point, that when we get to that point, having solar, you're off grid, you're not paying for electricity. There's a lot of stuff at the moment that's getting there. People are like, once they're there, once they've done it, they're like, bloody hell, I wish I'd done this sooner. That's the point that we need to get to, I think. And that's where I feel like I've got a really important job in trying to sell the change, because people don't like change initially. Even if it's like you've listened to Radio 1 for years and it was Nick Grimshaw on The Breakfast Show and you bloody love Nick Grimshaw, and then he left and Greg James came in, and for the first however many months you hated it because you loved Nick Grimshaw, but then you really started to love Greg James because, of course, Greg James is a legend and, he was put on that gig for a reason. people hate change in any way, shape or form. And particularly, I think when they feel like they're being forced to and it might come at an additional cost and it feels inconvenient for them when they can, there's so much stuff in the world that's scary and they're dealing with a lot. And, I just want to keep my car because it feels easy and safe and I know what I'm doing. But like the amount of people I know that have made that change and that are, really wishing that they'd done it sooner.
Although the car thing, I mean, we're going to end up back on the car thing, but it's just something that I've been covering a lot because I'm actually about to change cars. It's been something I'm considering. But although isn't public charging like really expensive? From everything I've seen, public charging is excessively expensive. And then the other debate, which I'm going to bring in because if I didn't, my dad might shoot me, is the whole thing of like obviously putting petrol in a car, diesel in a car is far quicker than charging a car. Agreed, stand by that, and the range you get is is a big difference oftentimes compared to your standard cars. There are ones with longer ranges, but it's like the whole thing of like, can we just stop talking about optimal range rather just give us the real world figures, guys, please?
I know. Do you know what? Totally. I hear you. It's a hard sell for somebody that does not have the ability to have a charger at their property. That is a difficult sell. I'll be totally honest. If you have a driveway and you have the ability to charge your car overnight, you have no excuse. It is a no-brainer. There is nothing more glorious than leaving your house every single day with a full battery and knowing that there are very few places in the country that you're going to get to that don't require a quick wee and a cup of tea stop anyway that are going to inconvenience you if you have a home charger. Don't get me wrong. If you do not have the ability to charge your car at home, I totally see that it will not be that much cheaper for you to own an electric vehicle because, yes, public charging at the moment is expensive because, well, electricity is expensive and that's a whole different ballgame because of the government and the way that we get our electricity. If we were to be able to utilise the renewables like we have so much offshore wind here in the UK, our energy really should be much cheaper and we have the ability to have so much more solar, but people are so reluctant to have solar because they don't want to live next to a solar field. So it's this constant battle of resistance that, again, if people understood properly, they might be a little bit more open-minded. And again, if the governments were more open-minded to make that shift and to bring people's energy bills down, and make it so much so like, the EV charging companies are not profiteering off of charging a lot of money. Ultimately, they're paying a huge standing rate of electricity because things are expensive and they're just passing that on to the customer because obviously they have to. So, yeah, it is a frustrating situation. It really is, whether you know everything about it or whether you don't know everything about it. But if you do have the ability to charge your car at home, it is glorious.
I obviously EVs are a huge part of one of the things we can change. What are some more of the like littler things? What are some things that people might not even thought of being more sustainable that they can bring into their everyday lives?
I mean, fashion and fast fashion, that industry as a whole, is a huge emitter to carbon and to the problem that our planet is in at the moment. It's second only in terms of carbon emissions to air travel and to like freight, moving things around our planet. It is the second largest emitter, the fashion industry, of carbon than even air. Than air travel. Sorry, that's the only thing that's above it. So I cannot stress enough how much where you put your money and how you consume clothes is going to make a big difference, because we've only got ourselves this situation where fashion is so cheap and so affordable, but also crap. Let's face it, like you really struggle to buy something cheap on the high street and wear it more than 10 times and wash it a couple of times without it getting a hole in or without it shrinking or without something happening to it. We've got ourselves into that state because of this whole like completely obsessive desire and want to have new stuff all the time, which is, again, so not what you need. Like, let's go back to being cave people where a couple of pairs, if clothes are functional, who am I to say? Because I love fashion and I love, an outfit for every occasion, but there are ways to do it that do not have the huge impact on the environment. Fashion is the biggest thing that if you just slowed things down slightly, would have a huge impact. Another one is your diet, what you eat. You do not need to cut out meat. You certainly don't need to go vegan, but beef is a huge emitter of carbon because the cows burn methane and, you know, the emissions associated with that industry. I'm from rural Lincolnshire. I am pro-farming, particularly back British farming for sure. Don't stop eating meat. Just reduce your meat intake. If you eat meat 7 days a week, can you reduce it to 4 or 5? And perhaps if you eat a lot of beef, can you maybe swap out a bit of beef for a bit of chicken? It's as simple as that. It really isn't, oh, my diet now consists only of a lettuce leaf and I shall only wear a hair shirt, you know, and that is why we want to do the Green Queens podcast, because there are ways of living far more consciously that aren't going to have a huge impact on you, but are going to have a huge impact on the environment.
I think as well as that whole thing of because one of the things I often wonder with friends that have been caught up in the movement of moving to vegan for sustainability purposes, I've often rebutted that of surely the amount of, I mean, I have admittedly, stupidly, should have Googled it, should have done my research. Yeah. But I always think surely the amount of production needed to produce oat milk, all these different ones, is a similar situation to what you find yourself in with your sort of carnivorous diet. That's the word.
Yeah. So I'm going to be totally honest. I mean, a vegan diet in terms of emissions alone, there's no question that it is so much better. Even when you look at, for example, the production of tofu and the amount of emissions associated with producing tofu, actually, the vast majority of tofu that is produced on this planet goes to feeding animals that are going to then be slaughtered for their meat. So it's an interesting one because a lot of the time these figures do get thrown around by people that are very anti-vegan by saying, oh yeah, but look at the emissions associated with tofu. Yeah, but only 20% of that tofu that is being produced is actually going to feed vegans. You know, 80% of it is going to feed animals that are then going to feed meat eaters. So it's a total bloody minefield. It really is. And that's why I'm not going to tell anybody to do anything or tell people not to do anything. I'm just going to give people the facts and the figures, and then it's totally up to them. And I think, you know, at the end of a month, if you do manage to reduce your meat intake slightly, it's a little pat on the back. Like, go you know, you've not had to sacrifice anything. Hopefully, if you can manage just to shop local as well, then you can reduce your food miles and all of those things tie in. It makes you think a little bit more about what you're eating. It might mix your diet up slightly. You will feel better for it. I think, you know, that is, we say about burying your head in the sand and sometimes the guilt associated with seeing the headlines or me stood in front of a red heat warning again. If you can think to yourself, this is really bad and this is really terrifying, but I've done my tiny bit. And that is that I have changed my diet slightly, or that is that I walked past Primark and Zara and went into, you know, cancer research charity shop instead and bought myself a dress for my thing on a Friday night, which I imagine you'll be doing, Charlie. You know, it's a little pat on the back situation for you. And God, if nothing else, then we can brag about it down the pub.
And I mean, the nice thing there is officially, I stand corrected. I didn't even think about the fact. That stat is terrifying. Yeah. But one thing, really, this is a really random point. But one thing I think would be really interesting to see the transition of is recently I spent some time in Spain. And particularly Barcelona, they're very big on their thrift stores. They're everywhere. And I wonder if we change the narrative from charity shop to thrift store, what the transition would be. Because I think there is still a bit of a stigma of, only my nan shops in the charity shop.
Defo. I think it's changing slowly because it is now cooler to say that you have shops secondhand. Yeah, for sure. But you're right. The charity shops still get a bad rep. And interestingly enough, we do chat about this on the Green Queens podcast. We do a whole episode. Well, we chat about it a lot because we bloody love clothes. But we had a whole episode with a girl called Olivia May, who did this really extensive piece of research into how shopping secondhand is impacting, you know, just the fashion industry. There's a lot of people that are employed in that industry. And the last thing we want to do is completely do all those people out of a job. That's not what we're trying to do. And that's not how it works. We're just trying to slow things down. So it was really interesting to see how the shift and like the displacement. So if you're, for example, buying something secondhand, is that stopping you from buying something new? Or are you just now buying two things, but one of them's secondhand and one of them's new? And there was a slight displacement there. So I can't remember the exact figures. Again, they're on our Green Queens. I think they're on my Instagram for sure. You'll know. But yeah, there's definitely a huge kind of moment that we're a part of at the moment. Charity shops are lagging behind slightly, and actually they are, even though they are getting more footfall, they are getting more people through the door because the rise of things like Vinted and eBay and Depop and people shopping secondhand online. They're like, people are saving their best bits to put on those sites that might have otherwise gone to a charity shop. And so actually the charity shops are seeing the quality of stuff that they're getting decline slightly because people are like, oh, nah, why would I give that Marks and Spencer's jumper to the charity shop when I think I can sell it on Vinted and get a £5 for it, and I'll just give, you know, my Primark tat to the charity shop. So there's an argument definitely that we need to try and like boost it and maybe do change our language a little bit.
I think as well is it's because interestingly Tiffany Drake brought it up of the uprise of Vinted and second-hand reselling has almost had a detrimental impact on sustainability because the surgence has been so high that it's actually like almost caught up with the mainstream. And then I think the other thing I was going to add is I think other people's reluctance to shop secondhand is also obviously shopping online sort of debunks this, but it's that whole thing of not being able to find what you want. So like it's that whole thing of, oh, I really like this shirt, but it's only available in that singular size and that's not my size.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like you have to be more open-minded when you're shopping secondhand. But I think the more people are listing stuff on secondhand sites, the more likely you are to find things. You know, that specific thing. I've literally seen something in a shop before or on a website before and put it into Vinted and found it for, you know, £10 cheaper that somebody's worn once to an event, or that they ordered it and they can't send it back because they got it in the wrong size. So you'd be surprised if you actually just spent the time. Or it may well be that, you know, the Vinted algorithm is actually so impressive. So if you use it, you know, I sometimes go on it on an evening when I've fed up with Instagram and just like a few things that I'm interested in or that I like the look of, and then it serves you things that it thinks you'll be interested in, and it's so bloody good. So it may well be that I've looked at, I don't know, a mango white skirt that I specifically have seen in mango, but then it will serve me things that are super similar, and I'm like, how are you doing this? This is so good. But then I end up buying the thing that's super similar because, you know, it knows me. My Vinted knows me.
AI, that is AI all day long.
Yeah, right.
But it's so interesting as well. I think there are so many little changes we can make. It's as we say, I think the biggest challenge that I can see is that it needs to be as easy as possible.
Definitely.
It's that whole thing of if we can make it as seamless as possible, people don't realise it's happening. It's just happened. And they're like, wait, what?
Absolutely. You know, it's got to be the cheaper option. It's got to be the easy option. And unfortunately, because a lot of things are in its infancy at the moment, if you're really passionate, if you really want to do it, you might have to do it with a little bit of inconvenience. You might have to do it with a little bit of additional cost at the moment anyway. Let's hope that the more people that do it, you know, the more things are rolled out for the mass market, the cheaper they get. It's just the way it goes. So maybe occasionally you will have to support something and put a little bit more money into it. But again, pat on the back. Like, what a great feeling to know that, like, we do all of our food shopping in a little deli in Otley, in the town near where we live in. It's such a nice experience. We go and we know the owners and we get a little loyalty card and we get fresh orange juice. And it's so, like, it's a nice experience. Yes, it is a little bit more expensive, probably not by much, to be honest, because we end up actually buying what we need as opposed to these huge, great, you know, bags of potatoes that me and my husband are never going to eat and then grow those little weird alien vein things. So, and like, I think it's worth the extra £5 or whatever that is, if you can afford it, to know that your money is going to that family and to have a conversation. Like, we need to reconnect with the people around us, and they know what we do and we know what they do. They know what our dog's called, and you can't put a price on that. You really can't.
I completely agree. And I think it's that whole thing of just more of that becoming available. I mean, I know from me now, I think there's only 1 or 2 farm shops within a set, like 5 miles of where I am. So then it becomes difficult. It's that whole thing of trying to make it as simple as possible and as easy as possible. So then people do think.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's, you know, hope I'm keeping everything crossed. I have days where I have great belief and I feel great about everything. And then I have days where I also feel like I just want to bang my head against a brick wall and move to a Greek island and never think about it ever again. But we'll see where we get to.
I hear that. And on that note, I'm going to ask you the last question that I ask every guest. Which is, what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree with?
Okay, this is a very good question. So I think now, having like a decade's worth of experience under my belt, and also being in my 30s and very rarely referred to as a girl, the phrase weather girl, I'm not mad keen on because you don't know of many weather boys. So if we could just be referred to as weather presenters, that would be wonderful.
I suppose as well that plays into the movement towards people using different pronouns as well. That kind of squishes that problem as well.
It's mad. It's so mad. And like, I'm 31 now. I'm not a girl anymore. As much as I love it when people tell me that I look very young, it's so the weather girl thing seems a little bit condescending. I find it a bit patronising.
It feels a bit like 50s, 60s, doesn't it? It feels like a little bit like, still itemizing women, and a
little bit. And look, I'm pro, I'm really not a judgmental person at all, and I'm not easily offended as well. So I'm not going to lose sleep if somebody calls me, and particularly if it's if it's done it with no malice. I'm totally impartial. It's unfortunately been done not with malice, but with quite a lot of sexualization during my career. Like, it's a strange job in that respect, that the minute I started doing it, I was just subject to this wave of attention that I definitely didn't expect.
The other thing as well, what a random thing to try and sexualize. Like, it's sort of just been this thing that's always been around, but I'm like, what? Where did that come from? What a random thing to be like, weather girl. What?
I know. I think it comes back. I think somebody actually did it. There was a Radio 4 documentary about this, and it was called something like Scorchio, the history of the weather girl. And I think it was almost a product of like what the media industry created when the first woman was allowed to, God forbid, do the weather. I think that they were almost put on as a bit of like a dolly bird, like, wear the short skirt and get it wrong occasionally. And, like, let's see if the viewers and that. So it was, to be fair to everybody that now has that view, I think that is almost how it was perceived in the early days, because that was just unfortunately the way that women were seen on telly in particular. So I think it's a product of, of a long standing issue, but I'm just like, guys, it's 2025.
It feels a bit old school, and I'm intrigued. I have to ask, have you raised this at all within your time at BBC to be like, guys, can we do something around changing this narrative?
Yeah, it's a funny one. So like I say, there was a BBC documentary on the radio about it. I would absolutely love to explore that in a TV documentary. And I've sort of like flirted with putting the idea out to commissioners. I just think I don't know if it's a bit too taboo. And to be fair, it's never something that has been an issue within the BBC. Nobody within the BBC has ever referred to me as that or anything. It's just something that has been projected on me a lot externally. But that, to be fair, the BBC have never been like, how do we feel about this? It's just sort of been allowed to happen. But, it's everybody has a right to say what they want to say, I guess. Free speech and all that. It's just something that, like I say, as I get older, I'm like, come on, surely we can change that a bit. Like, even the other day when I told somebody what I did, and they were like, oh, you're a weather girl, I was like, presenter, it's fine.
Just stick with presenter. I mean, the other thing as well is you don't know. I think that's the catch, isn't it? Is almost using this different language. People have to go again. It's that whole thing of making it easy. They have to go through that extra step, and it's weird that people struggle with it.
And like I say, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. It's just something that I would quite like to have phased out. By the time I'm, retiring and passing the baton on. I hear
that. But thank you so much for coming on, Abbie. Of course, we'll link all of Abbie's details below, as well as her podcast as well. So if you do want to check her out, I'll link everything below. And I'm sure if you do have any questions, I'm sure she'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
100%. Thank you so much for having me. This was such a joyful chat.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been amazing.